So in this video, I'm going to show you how to set up and edit a time-lapse video on your Insta360 X3 camera. On the Insta360 X3 camera, there's two options for doing time-lapse style videos. We've got time warp and time lapse. I prefer using time warp for things that are always in a constant state of movement. So say for example, if you were driving a car, that's the sort of motion I would use for using time warp. Whereas time lapse, this is what we're going to focus on in this video. I prefer using time lapse for a longer period of time. So if you're doing a sky that you want to get a time lapse of, or a sunrise or something like that, I'd recommend using a time lapse of that. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up the camera. So I recorded a time lapse before of a digger digging a mountain bike trail, and basically what I did was I attached the camera to the extended selfie stick from Insta360, and I stuck it in the ground and I put the stick up as high as it would go, so it was overlooking the digger where it was digging the mountain bike trail. As for settings, there are a number of different things you can do with this. I'm just going to jump into the settings now on the camera. When you navigate over to time lapse on your camera in the settings, you want to make sure 360 mode is selected, because you can do time lapses on both single lens and 360, but I wanted just to make sure I was shooting at 360 for this. So I selected time lapse. I then went to settings and I had my resolution at 8K just to make sure we were shooting in the highest possible quality we could. And then I kept my frame rate at 24 frames a second. You may want to change this and play around with 30 frames or 25 frames. I just kept it at 24 frames a second. The interval, this you can select between 0.2 of a second all the way up to 120 seconds. So what the interval does is, this is how much space there is in between every time the camera takes a photograph. So if we understand how a time lapse works, time lapses are where your camera will take a photograph at these set intervals, and then it stitches them together to create this like time lapse or sped up look to a video. And if you choose a 120 second interval, it will take a photograph and then it will wait 120 seconds and it will take another one, wait another 120 seconds and it'll take another one, and then it'll stitch all this together and you'll have your time lapse video. Obviously, if you choose a 120 second interval, you're gonna have to leave your camera running for longer, like say throughout the course of a day. Whereas for what we're doing, I simply selected an interval of 4 seconds, which would, you know, for about a 20-minute shooting time at 24 frames a second, it would probably give me around about a 15 or 20 second time lapse video, which is kind of what I was shooting for. So it's not so long that the camera's going to be sat there for ages, but depending on what you want to get a time lapse of, that will dictate your interval, your frame rate, and things like that. But I generally shoot between about a 4 and 5 second interval and either 24 frames or 30 frames a second. Let's jump over to Insta360 Studio and we'll take a look at how we edit this together. Okay, so we're over on my computer now and I've opened up my time-lapse video, so I'll just play it through and show you. It's basically a digger digging a mountain bike track. And you can see there's people working in the background, the sun is shining and changing and stuff. That's kind of cool. And you can see there a guy working on the side of the track here, so it's quite cool. I don't want to use all this time-lapse video, I just want to use a segment of it for my video, so I'm going to show you how to do that now. So I'm just going to go over to where I want the time-lapse to start, and we're going to trim this. So we're going to press Command and there's a left bracket button, or you can select this button here, the trim start button, and then we'll go to the end of the clip. Let's just go roughly a 15-second time lapse there. And this is 360 mode, so obviously we can pull the camera all the way around depending on what you are shooting and what you actually want to get in your time lapse. For me, the key point of this time lapse is to record the digger. So the digger is the main point in this. The digger is doing all the work, it's the focus, and it's moving across the scene. So we want to follow the digger, right? So we're going to go to the first frame, click back to the start, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit just to set, add a keyframe. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, let's set this here. And a couple of things we can do here. So as you can see, the digger is moving left across the frame and it kind of goes out of sight. So what we want to do is, I'm going to follow the digger and Try and keep him center, add another keyframe. He's moving again. So we're going to move across with him. And we can show you what this looks like. So you can see here, the camera moves and follows the digger. So that's one way to edit a time lapse, really simple to do in Insta360 Studio. What we can do now is we can also, we hover over the first keyframe and we can actually zoom in to the digger quite close, okay? And if we play it now, it should pan across the scene and also zoom out at the same time. So now we've got two elements of constraints playing. So this could look quite cool. Awesome. So I'm actually going to take that out. Let's play it again just to give it a smoother look. That is really cool. And all I've done there is add two keyframes, and I have set my first keyframe slightly more zoomed in, and then my last keyframe or second keyframe zoomed out. So the camera will be panning and it will be zooming out at the same time. So another thing we can do with our clip now, the base of a time lapse, we can add time shift. So this is where we can add a little bit of motion blur to our video. So what we can do is we can go to the start of the clip, or wherever you want to select your time shift, and time shift will basically add, you can basically speed up your time lapse, which sounds very strange because I know you've just sped up your from normal speed, but if we add this in, we can pull this across, and then we can determine motion blur is on for 2x speed and above. The effect will be applied after the export. Okay, so if I play this now at 2x speed, you might see a little bit of a motion blur. So it's a little bit more realistic on the eye. Kind of hard to spot, but if we increase this to like 4x, we won't see any difference until we export this. But let me just exaggerate this a bit more, 8x. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this at 1x speed. So I'm going to show you now how to export it. I'm just going to export it as Insta360 recommends. So bitrate is at 200, resolution's the same. I'm going to keep all the settings the same for this and click start export. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to export these 3 video clips, the 1x speed, the 2x speed, and the 6x speed, so you can see the differences between all 3 clips. Okay, so this is the 2x speed. Watch this. You can see it's fairly similar to what we created in the studio. There isn't much motion blur being added. There's a little bit I can see, but not too much. And if we play the second clip, you can see there, visually different. Bit more realistic, kind of a cool effect. And then the third and final one, which is 6x. Wow. So with that third and final clip, you probably would want to film a little bit longer just to make sure you have enough data to create a cool time lapse. From there, you can add those into your movie or video. Remember, Insta360 Studio is only a 360 reframing app. It's not a full video editing software, so I'd recommend using something like Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve to create your fully fledged videos. If you want me to do an editing tutorial of how I create these styles of videos, then let me know in the comments below. And if you've got any questions on time lapses or Insta360 cameras in general, pop them below and I will get back to you. And make sure you go and download my video settings cheat sheet, which is all my favorite settings for Insta360 camera. Link is in the description. This is it here. And yeah, hope this is useful. See you in the next video.